Thank you very much, Wendell. I hope, with your permission, to make the last full acknowledgement of the protocols. It would be not satisfactory if I, as your host, did not recognize, with your permission, the Honorable Philip Davis, Prime Minister of Bahamas and Chairman of the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community, Prime Ministers, all my colleagues from the Caribbean community, the Honorable Chief Justice, Mr. Justice Ivor Archie, ORTT, Chief Justice of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Honorable Bridget Anisette George, Speaker of the House of Representatives of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Carla N. Barnett, Secretary General of CARICOM, His Excellency Sergei Lechmy, President of the Collectivity of Martinique, Honorable Ministers, other heads of delegations, Leader of the Opposition, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Judges of the High Court, Members of Parliament, heads of international organizations, permanent secretaries and deputy permanent secretaries from the region and from Trinidad and Tobago, commissioners of police of the Caribbean, representatives of the Inter-Religious Organization of Trinidad and Tobago, representatives of the non-governmental faith-based organizations as well as civil society organizations, other specially invited guests, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, fellow Caribbean leaders, peoples of the Caribbean, from Mexico to Suriname, welcome. Welcome to this symposium, this unique exchange of experiences and perspectives among the people of the Caribbean. This morning, we, the many components of Caribbean leadership, stand here as a collective body, speaking to and with you, the whole of the Caribbean, above all, in our geographical, social, racial, religious, economic, and democratic complexities and diversity. This is a truly historic moment. What brings us here is not that diversity. It is not the usual command gathering to deal with trade, education, finance, tourism, health, or diplomacy. We have assembled here in this unity of purpose to confront a problem, one that is common and threatening to every aspect of every individual's life in the Caribbean. The founding fathers of this great Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Eric Eustace Williams, standing before a similar audience at the signing of the Treaty of Chaguaramas in 1973, noted that, and I quote, "All of us here today are genuine representatives of the Caribbean with a common history based on the Caribbean Trinity: colonialism, monoculture, and racism, the symbols of fragmentation and isolation of one territory from another," unquote. He added that there could be no Caribbean dispensation, no Caribbean future, which does not truly mean the integration of the peoples of the region and their economies. Dr. Williams then referred to what he described as, quote, "a larger aspiration," unquote, a larger purpose, advising that the Caribbean's strength is in its union and that the Caribbean's danger is in its discord. This morning, ladies and gentlemen, leaders of the Caribbean, we are here to address an aspect of that larger aspiration that Dr. Williams spoke of, displaying our union of purpose, and hopefully, we are all fully aware of the dangers that await us in this discord. As we are now well into the 21st century, the record will show that for all of the new era, we have continued to be haunted by violence from the domestic quarters at home to our schoolyards, to our streets and our borders. In short, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, violence is threatening to destroy our paradise in the Caribbean Sea. This is not to say that we have not been struggling to cope with this truth. On the contrary, we have been. But if we are not careful, its stubbornness and metastasizing malignancy could overrun and overwhelm us. Violence in the Caribbean is a public health emergency which threatens our lives, our economies, our national security, and by extension, every aspect of our well-being. In Trinidad and Tobago, in the years 2011 to 2022, we have lost and have had to grieve for 5,439 lives lost to violent murder, largely through the use of imported firearms and ammunition. In 2011, we lost 352 lives. And by 2022, the annual count was over 600, a new record, already being challenged by the murder rate for 2023. Except for COVID in a pandemic, none of the listed dangerous diseases have taken lives like this in our populations. For the thousands of wounded, victims and perpetrators alike, a surgical intervention to the head costs $170,000. A surgical intervention for a chest wound would cost about $135,000. A shot to the leg requiring surgical intervention would cost approximately $100,000. And a leg shot without surgical intervention could easily cost $40,000. All of this before you leave the hospital, and that in medical care and attention. All of these are frequent, daily incurred costs, and they are to be borne by taxpayers at every level, from scarce revenues diverted from other more deserving productive priorities. Our current laws acknowledge a suite of afflictions, such as yellow fever, smallpox, plague, cholera, Ebola, novel coronavirus as notifiable, warranting emergency responses if even only a few cases are known to appear. Violent behavior, violent crime involving the use of firearms, the associated individual and group mental health trauma accompanying violent behavior, so ever present amongst us now, pose a far greater destructive threat than these diseases, and on that basis alone qualifies violence as a public health emergency in our country and throughout the CARICOM. During the last 15 years, using the Trinidad and Tobago example, in the growing quest for safety and security, we have seen a significant increase in the allocation in the national budget for national security. In 2008, policing alone represented 32% of the $4 billion national security budget. By 2017, that rose to 38%. Even in the tighter budgetary environment of 2023, policing still now accounts for 43% of the national security allocation. In the political arena, some believe it's all about having the right national security minister. Others share the epiphany of separating the Ministry of National Security into fragments of Homeland Security and Defense. I wish it was that simple. In fact, Trinidad and Tobago's own experience put those theories to the test. In recent years, we, Trinidad and Tobago, had 10 ministers of national security sourced from career politicians, including that of Prime Minister, the military, and the private sector. One administration, PNM, had one minister who served for 7 unbroken years, grappling with the upsurge of violent crime and insufficiency of policing. A succeeding administration, the UNC, in a 5-year term, had 5 national security ministers with junior assistants, with tenure ranging from a few months each to 2 years. This current administration, PNM, has had 3 ministers in 8 years. And the one indisputable fact in all these musical chairs is that the violence has not abated. It has in many instances increased and become even more cynical. Clearly, the problem does not exist and grow because of a shortage of ministers or even ministerial output. This forum has been long in coming. Recently, CARICOM heads of government began looking at rising crime and violence in the region as a public health issue, with commitments to mount a symposium as this in 2019. But all the efforts were understandably displaced and delayed by the coming of COVID-19. It's against this background that when Trinidad and Tobago announced its intention to have its own national discourse, and our Caribbean neighbors gladly agreed to join in, that we had no hesitation in making room for widest participation. But having done so, we are all here today. And you must remember, as Booker T and the MG say, time is tight. So let us all very conscientiously make the most of it in small doses as we speak, listen, and absorb in preparation to fight this demon. Ladies and gentlemen, just look at media reports. They appear to be telling us that across the region, territories are under siege from the acts of crime and violence from elements of our own society, just minorities who are today creating larger atmospheres of fear, despondency, trauma, surrender, and hopelessness among all of us. This is a battle in which we must all be engaged. This is a war that we cannot afford to lose. In this engagement, governments are open to uncomplimentary charges of, some say, indifference, others say impotence, unimaginative planning, discrimination, abdication of duties, poor leadership, and with the repeated calls for resignations. Old talk is cheap. We know that, but let us try and extract some light from the expressions of the next 2 days, in the fervent hope and expectation that the beast of violence, which has stalked us for virtually all our existence in this blue Caribbean Sea, will be starved of its sustenance, condemned to wither and die, so that we all may live in peace, safety, and harmony, from the home to the streets, from the schools to the borders. Our presence here is admission that crime and violence are now a major part of the Caribbean's overall plethora of problems, ranging from petty theft to school violence, home invasion, domestic violence, sexual abuse, human trafficking, drive-by shootings, drug gang warfare, mindless daily revenge murders, and the list continues. When such a situation arrives at the door, it is said that there was a failure of the society to spot the oncoming crisis. Then there may be a later failure to perceive the extent of that arrived situation as a societal problem. Further, there may be problems of finding solutions, and whether the solutions selected may even succeed. Today, if there's one aspect that we all may be guilty of, is that the problem of criminality and violence was not dealt with sufficiently in a much earlier time frame. in the homes, in the schools, in the prisons, in the courts, and I dare say, in the parliaments. There was what can be described as, quote, a creeping normalcy, unquote. We allowed slow, moderate, deviant behavioral trends to increase. We allowed slips in our age-old standards, in ethical and moral norms in our family homes, in our schools, in public institutions, on our roads, and in public places. All of which, hindsight reminds us that we should have checked very early. Instead, we seem to have been saying that these times are different. This is the age of American gun culture. As we adopt the internet revolution with its tremendous promises and all its warts, an age of selfish individualism has been allowed to flourish at the expense of the society itself. So morals and values are now considered flexible. Their lines are blurred, and they occupy spheres of their own, determined and shaped by one's personal whims, the present, fashionable social trends, and worse, the political and bureaucratic shortcomings of something malleable called the system. So over the next 2 days, Caribbean people, helped by inputs from cross-sections of the Caribbean citizenry, will attempt to address the full scale of the problems of crime and violence in the context of a public health issue. Hopefully, there will be elements of operational consensus after the planned examination and exchanges, which will form a plan of action that will give the Caribbean people their much-needed assurance that something beyond talk will be done, using the same planned, programmed, and strategic methods that were adopted to confront the deadly challenges of COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, again, welcome to the Twin Islands of Trinidad and Tobago. And I pray that as we have done here in our Constitution in Trinidad and Tobago, that we recognize the Almighty's presence throughout all our deliberations. Finally, I must assure you that the Caribbean peoples, in spite of our circuitous history, we have evolved and continue to stand strong today. May Almighty God continue to bless us with success. Thank you.